Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Subscribing to My Podcast. Because I have a new guest on the show every week, it's very difficult to get consistent viewership. So if there's one thing that you can do to support me and the guest featured on my show is by interacting with the video. You can always unsubscribe later if you hate me or the content. Without further ado, here's your episode with Dr. Toyia Younger is the Vice President of Student Affairs at Iowa State University and is also the most fashionable woman on campus. I've had the honor of seeing a lot of her speeches in person, and now I get the opportunity to talk to her in person and interview. But Dr. Younger, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell some of the viewers some of the important things that they should know about you.
Well, I've been called a lot of things, but the most fashionable, I'll take it. I love that. I'm feeling that. So my role as Senior Vice President for Student Affairs is quite interesting because a lot of people are like, what the heck is Student Affairs? And so I tell people Student Affairs is everything outside of the classroom. So from your clubs and organizations, sororities and fraternities, to academic support and living in the residence hall, all those things fall under Student Affairs. And my primary job here on campus is to make sure that students have a good experience. Yes, we want you to learn. Yes, we want you to get a degree. All that's great. But we want you to have a good time while you're here. We want you to feel connected to the university. We want you to be engaged. And so that's what me and my staff do every day, are create opportunities for students to learn outside the classroom, to grow and develop as people, to make connections, and help them feel more connected and engaged to Iowa State University. So that's what I do every single day. Now, don't ask me what a typical day looks like, because that's a whole nother story, but that's what my job is. That's what it says on the paper. That's what the job description says.
Does it feel like you get an opportunity to do that? Like on a day, do you feel that? That's so awesome.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I am out and about, and that's on purpose. I'm very intentional of making myself visible on campus so that students see me, so that I can connect with faculty and staff as well. And so I'm always going to somebody's event. I just got invited to do Hot Ones from the Honors College. Is that not the craziest thing ever? And I thought it was because I was cute. I had no idea what the premise behind the show was, so they're probably going to try and kill me. But, I get invited to all these really cool things, and it's exciting to see students be engaged. It's exciting to see them plan and the work that they put into these major events, and then I get to come and attend. And so that's what I want. I want our students to feel connected. I want them to be doing things outside the classroom that help with their own personal development, because those skills that they take and the things that they learn outside of the classroom will help them once they graduate and get into the real world and what they do in the workplace. So it's exciting because I know that while I may not be contributing to your degree and teaching you economics, the work that me and my staff are doing are helping you grow and develop as a human being.
Yeah, and I think one of the big parts of the job, it seems as if you're like a public figure. You know what I mean? You like represent Iowa State in a huge way, in that like people think of our leadership team, people think of the people at the top, and it's like you and Wendy and a few others, and it's like you guys are the people that are, when they're walking around campus, it's like, I just saw Dr. Younger. You know, it's like a fan thing. And so you're going to these events and they're like, we got to get you over here to come do these things. And I feel like that's such a unique and cool responsibility. But I also feel like it would probably stress you out a little bit to see that you're like always kind of representing campus, even when maybe you don't want to be. You're just walking around, you know what I mean? And you're supposed to be like the face of this campus, and then you're just like really tired one day and you're just walking around. So what do you have to say about like that kind of pressure or that kind of awesome responsibility that you have?
Well, it is awesome responsibility. And I'll tell you, it took me some time to adjust to it. I moved here from Washington, D.C. There's millions of people. I can walk up the street in D.C. Nobody knows who I am and nobody cares. Like I could do backflips in the street of D.C. and everybody would just look and be like, get out the way, lady. Like nobody cares who you are. And so coming to Ames and specifically the campus, I felt like I was in a fishbowl because a lot of people didn't know me. And I was wondering if I kind of created this myself, because I came here in 2020 and, that was in the middle of the pandemic. Folks were still online. And so I was like, how are people going to get to know me? When folks finally met me in person, they were like, oh my gosh, you're tall. And it was because they had spent 6 months seeing me on Zoom, And so once things kind of chilled out with the pandemic and I was able to get out and about, I did everything. Like 2021 and 2022, I was everywhere because I wanted people to know who I was. Then, after being completely exhausted from doing that, now everybody knows who I am, and I'm like, ugh. So, like I literally, I'm at Walmart at like 6 a.m. on Saturday because I know y'all are all asleep, and I have on my hoodie and my like with my dark shades, like nobody's gonna know who I am. And sure enough, they're like, oh my God, Dr. Younger, I love Lucky Charms too. Like I mean, it's crazy, and I've gotten used to it, but sometimes it does feel like pressure. Sometimes I can't just go out and with my girlfriends and sit up or whatever because I'm going to look up and glance up and I'm going to see somebody that's going to come over and it's great. It's great to be known. I want people to know who I am. I want people to know the services that my offices provide and how we're here to serve students. But sometimes it can be a little bit much. And so I can't believe I'm getting ready to tell you this. I DoorDash all the time, but I have a secret account. Okay. Because I was like, if I put Toyia, they're going to know, there's not that many Toyia.
I really want to know your code name or like what the name you use is, but I won't advertise that.
But I'm like, people will know that it's me. There's not that many Toyas in Ames. And so I was like, then they'll know where I live. So I do like no contact delivery under a fake name so that they can just leave my food because I'm convinced that a lot of the people who are door dashing are students. And one day I'm going to open the door and they're like, oh my God, Dr. Younger. And I'm like, don't tell anybody where I live.
Right.
So I have to do things to kind of protect my peace and protect my space. But overall, I enjoy it. I thrive on people and being around people. So it can be fun. It's a fun time.
I bet the people who are door dashing now are going to be like looking out their windows, trying to catch you, like sneaking around.
Right, like I knew it was her. I knew it was her.
Guys, like 100 people.
I know, right? Seriously.
Well, I think it's interesting because obviously this is the only college that, I guess maybe not obviously, but this is the only college that I've been to and that I've seen, and I wonder how many people are able to recognize their like vice president of student affairs. I wonder if they're able to recognize them like they would with you. And I don't know if like maybe most deans are like you or if you're kind of doing this because it's just your personality. And I see that you're just really energetic, you're really happy with people, and you really try to put yourself out there. Yeah. But I don't know if that's like a normal thing, and it seems like it isn't.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the person. But I think, in particular, I hate talking about the pandemic because I feel like that was so traumatizing, right? But it changed us. And so, when I came in August of 2020, I knew that it was going to take a lot for me to get students to re-engage on this campus. I knew that. And so I was very intentional on being visible, connecting, going to places, all that kind of stuff. And I think that some people in this field recognize that, and so they're getting a little bit more, coming out a little bit more, being a little bit more visible on their respective campuses. But I think a lot of it is really my personality. That's who I am. I've been in a variety of positions, both on campus and off campus positions, and even in my off campus positions, I was very visible. Everybody knew me. It's just kind of a thing, and part of it is really just my personality and my desire to serve. Like, I get happy when I see students doing well. I get excited when I see people doing podcasts, doing, all these major, really cool things on campus. That excites me, and it makes me want to be out even more. It makes me want to get more and more students engaged over time. And so some of it probably is my personality, and I know I'm a little bit much. Like, let me be very clear. I am completely over the top, but that's what makes me me, and I love it.
Yeah, and I think it's fairly obvious that campus loves you too, and just the way that you express yourself and the way that you're just so energetic, which I guess I don't see from a ton of like higher up staff. And so I think it's a very interesting thing, and it makes sense that it's almost like a redemption from the pandemic because things were so hard, but now you guys are like ready to chug through. I wanted to talk about like your journey here and what brought you here, because being a part of student affairs seems like you could go from anywhere and be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I read your, I read the form that you sent in with all your information. It's like you've been like everywhere.
Right, right.
Walk me through kind of like the journey that brought you here.
Well, interestingly enough, I was a sociology major in our School of Public Affairs at Michigan State University. And so most of the folks in my major and in our program, you either went on to law school or you went to Washington, D.C. And so my senior year, I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I mean, true story. I was like, I have no idea. And so, some of my friends were studying for the LSAT. And so I was like, okay, I'll study for the LSAT. It was really like, I didn't want to go to law school. I just didn't have anything to do. And so I was like following, doing what you're not supposed to do, following the crowd, right?
Right.
And so I took the LSAT, actually did pretty well on it. And then was like, I don't want to go to law school. That was really stupid. And so by this time, it's like February of my senior year. And I'm like, I better figure out something, So I was like, I'll go to D.C. I've been to D.C. a few times. My friends go to college out there. It's a cool place. We'll see. So I applied for a summer internship in D.C. To work with my U.S. senator. And that was kind of cool, because I was always interested in like politics, and D.C. is the place to do that. And so but it was an unpaid internship, right? And so I took all the money from like my college graduation party and moved to D.C., right? And so my family was like, that's cute, and it seems like you like it, but you got to get a job. Like, there's no way that we're just going to let you hang out and kick it in D.C., right? So after 3 weeks, there was an entry-level position that became available in the office. And all of the interns who were in my program or in my cohort that summer were like juniors and had to go back and finish their senior year. I was the only person who had actually graduated. So when they came to me and approached me, and, this is literally in the interview, like, oh, so why do you want this job? And I'm I'm 21, little knucklehead. I was like, I don't have anything else to do right now. I need to make some money. So they were looking at me like, what? Did you just say that in an interview? Yeah. But it was true. So I guess they appreciated my authenticity, I guess, But I ended up getting that job, and I loved it. And so I worked on Capitol Hill. I started my career on Capitol Hill for 3 years, and I switched over and worked in the House of Representatives for a congressman who was on the education committee. And that's how I kind of got interested in the education piece. They were talking about affordable, same thing we're talking about now. College is expensive. How do students afford college? So I really got interested and intrigued in that level of work. And so I shared with the congressman, this is something that I'm really interested in. And he was like, oh, I think you should go back and get your master's. And I'm like, slow down. Did you see my undergrad GPA? Like, I graduated. Everybody's like, oh my God, I graduated summa cum laude. No, Toyia graduated. That was about it, So I was like, I can't go and get a master's. Are you kidding me? And he was like, no, I really think you should. And so I decided to apply for a master's program. And I tell this story because never say never. I got admitted as a provisional student, basically meaning we're going to test you out because your grades and your scores aren't really looking like you can perform at this level.
You can do it.
But they read my essay where I was like, I'm genuinely interested in helping students, and I think this is important. College was a great experience for me, and I want others to have that same experience. So I wrote this really great essay, and they gave me a chance. And they basically said, you have 2 semesters to prove yourself. And I ended up going in that first semester and getting a 4.0. Why? Because it was something I was passionate about and I was really interested in. So I ended up getting my master's degree. That was great, and started my career as my very first job once I finished my master's was director of student engagement. So I was the advisor to student government. I was over all the clubs and organizations and loved that work, and came across someone several years later, and they said, oh my gosh, you're really doing some great things on this campus, but you're young, and it was interesting. That was my first time experiencing ageism. My last name is Younger, and I was the youngest director on campus, and people would joke about that. And I was like, oh, that's funny, last name Younger, ha. But they were really kind of questioning if I had the ability to do these things because I was so young, And so I was talking to this person, and he said, wow, you're doing such great things on campus. But, in order for you to kind of have that credibility behind you, you need to go get a PhD. Slow down. like, y'all doing too much, right? And so I listened, thankfully, went back and got my PhD, and have basically spent my career working at colleges and universities across the country. But I did spend some time working at 2 national associations in D.C., and that was really interesting. One of them is APLU, the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, and we're a member of it. So it's all the large Research One universities. And so ironically, during the time when I worked for them many years ago, I was working with the vice presidents of student affairs at all those member institutions. And so that was really cool. It's kind of serendipity that I would end up being a vice president at one of those institutions so many years later. and, really enjoyed the work that I was doing at the association, but I was missing one thing, students.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's time for me to come back and be on a campus. And so I interviewed for a position, didn't tell anybody. I applied I was nominated for a vice president position. Didn't tell anybody. I thought I was going to be slick and, nobody was going to know anything about it. And surprisingly, they called me for an interview, and then I made it to the finals, and they invited me to campus. And I was like, whoa, like I wasn't expecting this to happen because I don't have a traditional path. Most people in student affairs are a director, and then they move up to assistant dean, dean of students, and then vice president. That wasn't my trajectory. So I wasn't even sure if colleges and universities would look at me because they might think that I had been too far removed, that I was this DC policy person, that, so I wasn't even sure that I would make it. And so nevertheless, I made it to the finals at this university and had a great time being on campus, talking to the students, interviewing. And so I was like, even if I don't get this job, this is showing me that it's time for me to come back and be on a campus. And so I didn't get this job, and I was kind of bummed out about it a little bit. But if I would have got that job, I wouldn't have been at Iowa State, right? And so I didn't get the job and decided, this is my time to be around students. So I applied for several positions, and then March 2020 happened. The world completely shut down. So all of the searches that I was in, they would call me, and I tell this story because it's absolutely hilarious. They were like, we're going to wait about 2 or 3 months for the pandemic to pass over, and then we'll call you back and bring you to campus. And so needless to say, that never happened because it was like 2 years, right? But so when I got the call from the search firm about the job at Iowa State, I was like, I'm not even about to waste my time. They said, nobody's moving forward. We're in the middle of this global pandemic. They are not trying to hire somebody and have them move to Iowa. This is stupid. I'm not doing it. And the guy kept calling. He was like, no, they are. He was like, the position is vacant. They need somebody in this role. I really think that this is going to be a good fit for you. And I was like, tell me where it is again. And he said, Iowa. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm not going to Iowa. I'm not doing that. And so he kept calling me back, and he was like, no, I really need your information. Like, you've got to come back. You've got to apply for this position. So he said, I need your information, your materials on Monday. So on Sunday, I was like, whatever, let me just send this to him so he'll get off my back kind of thing, So I sent him my materials, and he calls me on Wednesday and was like, congratulations, they want to meet with you. And I'm like, wait, what?
In Iowa?
In Iowa, wait, what? And so my first interview with the search committee was on Zoom. And that was my first interview on Zoom, period. And so it was a lot for me because I was like, this is weird. We weren't experts in Zoom at that time. We had just started using it. So I'm like, can you hear me? Like it was just really weird. And I felt like I wasn't sure if they were seeing who I was or, the energy and all the things that I bring because I'm on a computer screen.
Yeah.
And so it was really weird for me. And I wasn't quite sure, how things played out. But as the interview went on, I got more and more comfortable. And so after I logged off on that Zoom, I was like, dude, I killed that. Like, they should be
they'd be honored to have it.
They should call me back. And so the irony is a couple days later, I hopped in the car and I drove home to Michigan. I'm from Michigan originally. And my mom is there, and she lives by herself, and I wanted to check on her. Is this pandemic? We didn't know what was going on. So I said, well, I'm working remotely anyway. I can drive home, check on my mom. So I was at home in Michigan when Iowa State called and said, congratulations, you're a finalist. And they were like, we want to interview you it's going to be 2.5 days, all on Zoom. And I'm like, wait, what? And I'm like, how am I going to do this? Mind you, I'm at my mom's house where like she still has a home phone that rings really loud. She don't have high-speed internet. She got basic,
Probably dogs over there barking.
She'd be coming in the interview. Do you need something? And I was like, I cannot do this major interview at my mom's house. So the very next day I hopped in the car and I drove back to DC so I could be in my cute little fancy apartment with my high-speed internet. I could have the lights on me, the whole nine. And the interview was 2.5 days, and it was the most grueling interview I've ever had in my life.
That sounds horrible. I don't know if I could sit in front of a computer for 2.5 hours interviewing for this job.
I mean, it was insane. It was like every hour on the hour, I would click a different Zoom link, and it would take me to a different group of people. So like one group was the students, one group was the search committee, the other group was the staff. Then I had to record presentation, which was, interesting because most time they do make you do a presentation when you come to campus. So I had to record this presentation and then they showed it, but I didn't know how many people were watching it. So I didn't know if there were like 20 people or if there were like 1,000 people watching it. So after it's over, I'm sitting there on camera, in Zoom, and this voice pops up and she's like, "Hello, I'm the moderator for today's discussion. And so now we're going to open the floor for questions for Dr. Younger." And I'm like, who's watching? Who's asking questions? So that it threw me off. And she was reading the questions that were coming into her. And so once again, it was just a very unique situation. I hadn't experienced anything like that, And so the very last interview on that Friday was with students. And that's what sealed the deal for me. It was July, it was a Friday morning, and it was 8 a.m. And they're like, "Well, yeah, the student leaders want to meet with the candidates." And I'm like, dude, ain't no students getting ready to wake up. Oh, no, nobody is going to be in July. Like, are you kidding me? And I log on at 7:56, and there's 26 students on the screen. And I was like, oh, hello, everybody.
Wow.
I was totally caught off guard, but it let me know that this position was important to students, and they wanted to make sure that they got the right person in this position. And so, before we started the conversation, they had their questions prepared. I mean, they were ready, And I said, "Well, hey, how you guys doing? This was kind of a crazy semester, right? Like, you went to spring break and then you came back and we sent you home. Like, how are you doing? How are you coping with being at home, away from your friends, doing class online? All of this must be kind of challenging. How are you doing?" And this one young lady just burst out crying. And she's like, "Nobody ever asked us that." And so we ended up having a whole conversation about the pandemic, about mental health and the resources that they felt they needed, about their fears about transitioning back to college, once campus reopened that fall. And it was a really important discussion, but it caught me off guard because I just was not anticipating this. I thought it would be 2-3 students and that's it. And so ironically, the next week when President Winterstein called and offered me the job, she was like, "I've heard all these things, great things about you. Here's some of the feedback from the committee." I watched her presentation. I was like, I knew she was online. If nobody else was watching, she was watching,
She was writing all those questions.
Exactly, right? And then she said, but it was the feedback that I got from the students. And she was like, "They need you. Iowa State needs you. And so I want to make you an offer." And I'm like, I was overwhelmed, but in that moment, I knew that this was going to be the right place for me. And the rest is history. And so it has not been a linear journey. I have been all over the place and had a variety of experiences, but I feel like that's what prepared me to do well here at Iowa State University.
Wow. So
isn't that a lot?
I know.
Isn't that crazy?
That's so wild. I just couldn't have, being in DC and then going from like politics to going into like, just randomly someone's putting you in an educational position and then you're like, I kind of like this. I didn't even know how I would decide if I kind of like this. Right. And then you get in front of students and you're like, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And so it seems like students were like the big motivation that kind of like strung you along, especially past a certain point once you started getting into education. You're like, I really like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what it is about like the students' experience? Do you know what it is about working with students that like you really appreciate or that motivates you?
Because I feel like students are honest and they tell you what they need. All you got to do is listen to them. And so oftentimes I think as administrators, we do what we think students want us to do without asking them, And so my job is to really listen and hear what the students need and try and provide that support for them. I had a great experience at Michigan State, don't get me wrong, but we all have those bumps in the road. I wanted to change my major and I met with my advisor and she was like, "Nope, it's too late. You're stuck with it. You can't change. And if you do, you're going to be here a year longer." And that would suck. Okay, next. And I was like, what? And I was in tears. And I remember saying, I won't ever want a student to feel like that after they leave a meeting with me. I don't ever want a student to not get their questions answered or not feel supported. In that moment, I did not feel supported in my educational journey. And so that was kind of the premise for me going into this field, is because I don't want students not to feel supported. I recognize that navigating through college, it's fun, exciting, it's all these things, but it can be hard and it can be stressful and it can be all those things. I want to help students learn how to navigate and get through it successfully, and I had that. The only reason I was able to experience it is because I did have mentors on campus. I did have things. I was a Spartan aide, same thing as a Cyclone aide. I was a RA. I was in student government. I got really involved in those different groups that I was in is what kind of helped solidify my time at Michigan State. And so I understand how important those experiences are to who I am now and how they contribute to who I am now. And so my motivation really was helping students, being there for them, recognizing that, for some people, college is easy breezy. They don't have a problem. They breeze through, they do well, and they keep it moving. Others come to our campus with a variety of issues. They bring themselves when they come to campus, and some of them may be struggling because they have a learning disability, or some of them may be coming from any inner city of Chicago and coming to Ames, Iowa is like, whoa, culture shock. Like everyone comes with these different identities when they show up on campus. But I don't care what those identities are. I want to serve. I want to make sure that you have a great experience while you're here. I want to make sure that you feel supported and have all the tools that you need to be successful while you're at Iowa State University. So that's what I do. That's what my motivation is, even on the bad days where I'm like, oh my gosh, if another student pulls the fire alarm in Friley at 4 a.m., I'm going to scream, right? Like, come on, y'all. Everybody got to sleep sometime, But even on those days, like, I recognize that it's important for students to feel like they belong here, like that we want them here and that they have access to all the different resources that we provide that's going to help them be successful.
And I think that's such a powerful motivation to be doing things. And I think it's kind of hard to remember those things, especially as you graduate and like get older. You're so far removed from like your college experience. You start to forget those things. And it's really refreshing to know that like the people who come back to college truly come back because they want to engage with this group again.
Absolutely.
And it's really easy to just kind of forget about that and then just to kind of like move past college. So it's really awesome that you're back and that you're working with us in that way too.
I know, isn't that crazy? It's hilarious. Like when I go in and meet with different groups of students, I have to take myself back, and so I meet with student government. I was like, well, I was vice president of student government. And I was like, oh, dude, I sound like an old person, like reliving my memories or whatever. But, I was an RA, I was a Cyclone aide, I was a Spartan aide or whatever. And so I think that that's one of the things that helps me connect with students, though, too, is that I've been in similar situations that they are. I struggled academically like a lot of our students do. All the things that I think a lot of our students experience, I probably experienced myself. And I think that that's why I use those experiences to cultivate new opportunities for students on campus.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to get a look at, what the creative process behind, this job looks like. So when your focus is to work on students, what were some of the goals that you had when you first came here? Like, what were some of the things that you wanted to do, implement, change for the sake of students? And then looking into the future, what are some of the things that you want to implement? So, like, what was your game plan when you came here for working with students? And then how has it been realized in the last 4 years?
Well, I think the first goal was to just make sure that people felt like they belonged on this campus and that they were engaged. And that was hard to do in the middle of the pandemic. And so during the pandemic, we were trying to figure out how we could connect with students, be it in this new virtual space that we found ourselves in, but we didn't want to lose them just because they were back home or that they weren't on campus anymore. And so we offered a lot of programs and services virtually during that time. And what we learned during that time is that we reached more students than we normally would. There are some students who are not just going to walk in the counseling center. They're not just going to walk in and talk to somebody. And so because we had these virtual experiences available to them, they sought out more resources and sought out more help. And so when we when the pandemic calmed and we were back on campus, we had to make some decisions about what we would do moving forward. We didn't want to completely cut off that virtual space because we had first-time students who never reached out to us connect with us during the pandemic. So we were like, okay, how do we keep some of that going, but also recognize students are excited to be back on campus. They want to see us face to face. We have to be here. And so it was. That's where the creativity came in about what things did we learn during the pandemic that we can continue doing, but also how can we make sure that we're back in person, we're back face to face, because there's a large population of students who still need that as well. And so trying to figure that out was kind of my number one game plan coming in. And, and I think we're getting there. It's exciting. We looked at the data to kind of track levels of student engagement. And so this year, particularly in the residence halls, we finally reached the same level or capacity that we were at pre-pandemic. People were living in the residence halls, living, Freddie Court, enjoying their time living on campus. And then after the pandemic, it was like, I don't know if I want to be around people. I don't know if I want to live in the residence halls. And so those numbers declined. And so now we're seeing an uptick again where students are like, oh, no, I totally want to live on campus. I understand, that's how I meet my friends. That's how I connect with people. So I feel like we're getting back to some of those pre-pandemic levels when we're looking at student engagement. We're seeing, students are forming more clubs now. They're back in, they're going to events more than they were maybe just even a year or two ago. And so some of the things that we're doing are trying to make sure that students feel comfortable in that space again. None of us could have ever predicted what March 2020 was going to bring. Nobody knew, and it was overwhelming. It was scary. It was all these things. And so now that we know and we've learned some lessons from that, I think that has helped us as we've tried to create more opportunities for students. It's helped us realize that every student is different, that some students will still never show their face in some of our offices. But if we have an online or a virtual community, they'll connect there and they'll still get the services that they need. And so, coming in, it was really kind of trying to figure out how to reacclimate our students back to campus after something so major has happened that really shook all of us up. And it wasn't just focusing on our students, but it was focusing on my staff. My staff were having challenges. I was having challenges. I was like, if I don't get out of this house, I'm going to scream. It was a lot. And so being there to support my staff during that time and make sure that they're okay and listening to some of them, they were the ones that came up with some of the ideas of saying, hey, we've really seen an uptick. We need to keep this going, even though we're back in person. We've seen more students engage and seek out counseling services. We've got to figure this out. That's where the whole Tella Health came from, was that, we had more and more students after the pandemic saying, whoa, that was a lot, and I'm struggling with anxiety. I'm trying to get acclimated. This is a little bit too much. And the numbers of students who reached out to counseling was overwhelming. We did not have the capacity to meet with all of those students right at that time. And so we searched around and ended up entering into a contract for Tella Health. So now counseling services are available to all students 24/7, and they can do it from home. They can do it on their telephone. Now, we still have in-person meetings for those people who want to have those types of sessions. If there's a crisis that happens with Tella Health, they will call and notify somebody on campus. So it's not, 100% virtual. But that was a huge lesson that we learned on how we can do both and, how we can still serve those students who want to be in person, but also make opportunities for students who aren't going to necessarily walk through your door. And so, just that was my big goal, is how do I get students and even my staff to get acclimated being back on campus after such a major life occurrence took place, and that's hard.
Yeah, that seems so daunting, because I feel like in student affairs, the problem has always been, how do we get people to engage?
Right.
How do we get more people coming to our things? But then you get people acclimated to not doing that for a year and a half. They're all doing virtual. Yeah. Once you get out of that, it's like, you guys can go outside again. A lot of people are just like, I don't know if I really want to.
Right,
I'm kind of chilling in my room now.
I've gotten used to it.
Yeah, they were forced to do it for so long.
Yeah.
And so it feels like such an even more daunting task to be like, all right, kids, come on in, let's hang out again.
Yeah.
Especially this is your first time in college, and it's like, I could stay in my dorm and hang out, or I could go out and hang out with 1,000 people I don't know.
Right.
I've been in my dorm for a year and a half. I might as well just chill here. And so it seems like such a daunting task. And so I feel like using the online, keeping the online thing going while also doing the in-person stuff seems like just a really good compromise. We get that some of you are probably more comfortable here than you were there, but giving both options is super important. And so
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's really good. And then in the future, what are you guys looking to do, and what are some of your
Right.
plans?
Well, and we'll see. We'll see what things need to stay on. We have a excellent team that does assessment in the Division of Student Affairs, and so they pull the data. They're constantly tracking student engagement, what it looks like. We had Cyclone Welcome Weekend for the first time a couple of years ago, trying to get students to engage and feel welcomed back to campus in August. And that was unique. We had never done anything like that. We know students, made their way across the street on that Saturday. And we just wanted, to offer other opportunities for students to feel welcome back on campus. And so that was, talk about daunting, doing something that has never happened on this campus. And so we launched Cyclone Welcome Weekend, and it started, that Friday night with a cookout. And we're like, okay, let's see how many people show up. I was like, I'll be happy if 50 people show up. Like, I don't even know what's going to happen. And we looked up, and there were like 4,000 students who came to this cookout for the first time. And we're like, wow, this is amazing, And a lot of them were freshmen, but we also had returning students who were like, oh, wow, this is kind of cool. And then the next day we had our goat breakfast, greatest of all times, and also featuring baby goats. We had this huge kind of extravaganza on Central Campus, and all of these students were coming, and we were like, whoa. We didn't anticipate this, especially knowing that there were activities right across the street that they could have been engaging in. But they were like, I don't want to do that. I just want to come. I want to meet new people. I want to hang out. I want to get a free breakfast, all that kind of stuff. And so it was really daunting at first. But, we've seen the data that have shown that students come to this and that they look forward to it and they engage and they meet a lot of their friends, new friends, at these Cyclone Welcome events. So we're going to continue doing that. We're going to continue having that space available. We're going to continue working with our partners to think of other new ways that we can connect students. And sometimes it is daunting because it hasn't been done before. And so that's why I think it's so important for us to have the data so that we can see, oh, wow, this is making a difference. But also, if it wasn't, we could pivot and say, okay, we're, doing all this stuff and students really aren't connecting. Maybe we need to think of another way to help students engage when they first come back to campus. But for now, it's working. And we're excited about it. And people are asking us, you're doing Cyclone Welcome Weekend again. And, my staff is like, are we? That was a whole lot of work. You mean we're doing this again? But because we've seen the data and the students have said, we want that. We want an alternative to going across the street. We want to, hang out and meet new people and have a good time doing it. And it's cool that we can do it right here on Central Campus. And so we're going to continue doing those things. And I think that that's one of the things that I've learned being in this position is it's a lot of trial and error. We've come up with these great ideas and was like, oh my God, we're going to do this. And 2 students show up and I'm like, we're not going to do that again. But it sometimes it is trial and error and you try certain things out and you might have to tweak it. But then when we get the feedback and we collect the data from the students who are like, no, I really appreciate it, you all having this event, or it was totally cool. After I left the goat breakfast, I went around campus and looked and found all my classes, so I would be ready that Monday when classes started. That's the kind of feedback that helps us kind of plan and think about what we want to do for the future. And so I'm very cognizant of the fact that we have to pay attention and listen to what the students say when they give us our feedback. Because, I could plan things all day, every day, and 6 people show up, but I have to get that feedback from them to say, no, this really does make a difference. This is really interesting. This is something that I enjoyed. You should keep doing that. And that's kind of how we operate, is by kind of keeping our ear to the ground. And students, if something went wrong, you become Dr. Younger, that was a bust. Don't ever do that again. That event sucked. You should never bring that speaker back. We listen and say, oh, we better not do that one again, getting the input from students is very important as we plan for what we're going to do in the future.
Are there any majority opinions of things that you're hearing other than maybe COVID related issues, but are there any issues that students are speaking out about more recently that you're looking to work on or implement, or that you've heard a lot of recently?
Well, we've a lot of people have been talking about the issue with regards to student debt, and so a lot of times when, I hear all the good and all the bad. So that could be overwhelming in my position. But, a lot of students saying, oh my gosh, I've got to take this class over and I don't know if I'm going to have enough money to pay for it. And so, we're really trying to connect students, point them in the direction in terms of financial aid and resources. We're hearing a lot of stories about that. Oh my gosh, I took on an extra major, so I'm gonna be here another year, and I'm like, sucks for you. No, no, I think it's great. I think it's great that you took on another major, but how are you gonna pay for that, and what are we gonna do? And so, I really see my office as kind of like the liaison to these other areas. So when students do come with concerns, we can kind of point them in the right direction. You need to go here. You need to go there. And so, I think the student debt issue is a big deal for students. People, and particularly their parents, are like, I don't want little Johnny going and accumulating all this debt. He gets a degree and then he can't get a job, And so that's why we put the emphasis in on trying to help students develop as looking at the whole student and their personal and interpersonal development so that they can get jobs. We can get you the degree. That we do that easy, but we want to make sure that you have the skills necessary to go out and get a job and get employed. But we also don't want you to go out in the workforce and be saddled with tons and tons of debt. And so, that's what you hear in the news, or that people are apprehensive about pursuing college because of how much it costs. And so we've got to do a better job of sharing resources with our students about scholarships, about grant funding, about ways in which that they can get the financial support that they need. And so that's one of my priorities.
Yeah, and I think that's always going to be a struggle with college, and I think it's probably one of the loudest conversations surrounding college. So I'd imagine that that's a lot of the stuff that you talk about with students when they're talking about that, just because it is such a big deal. And so our financial aid department has been really awesome with just communicating. Like, it's nice that students work at the desk, so they can talk to you, be like, yeah, I know about this, you know what I mean? And so I do really like our financial aid department right now. I haven't had any bad experiences with them so far.
Well, and it's interesting because, students come to me for a variety of things, and I love that. A lot of people feel like they can't reach out to administration. And so when I'm at events, I say, oh my gosh, you can hit me up, T. Younger at Iowa State, And some people will email me, and then when I respond, they're like, oh my God, I didn't expect you to respond. I'm like, well, dude, you emailed me. Of course I'm going to respond, So I've had students email me like, I'm working on this project for my class, and I'm supposed to interview somebody. Can I interview you? Sure, I can do that, But oftentimes when I'm meeting with them for a variety of issues, their finances always come up. It usually is one of the struggles, and they're looking for help. And so I feel like that's my job, is to try and point them in the right direction or connect them with other people on campus who can help, because I want them to stay. I don't want them to come, have maybe a mediocre experience. It was okay. Or even have a great experience and then say, but I can't afford to stay and I'm not going to finish. And then they leave or stop out and they never come back. I don't want that to happen either. And so that's why I put the emphasis, and my staff really puts the emphasis on making sure that students are aware of all the resources on campus, because a lot of times they're like, I didn't know. I didn't know that, financial aid does full workshops on like time management, money management, credit cards, not going out and getting a credit card and putting your tuition on it. You know what I mean? Those kind of things. A lot of people have no idea that financial aid offers those resources. And so I feel like because we're more boots on the ground, student facing, and we hear all of that, it's important that me and my staff are sharing that information and getting that information out to students who may not have otherwise found that information.
It seems like it might be kind of hard to be having some of these conversations that are difficult for students. And then I know you care so much about the students, and so it seems like it'd be kind of difficult to be having almost these therapy sessions with students when they're talking to you about like, hey, I have these struggles and this like sucks in this way for me right now. And so I guess, what are some of the difficulties in this job, and then how do you kind of surpass those when you're faced with these problems?
It's interesting because as we talked earlier, I hear everything. I find out about every crisis on campus, every major thing, good or bad, I hear about it. And so, and sometimes, we've had some things that were very daunting, that were, overwhelming. And so I don't know if it's healthy or not. So I don't know if I should use this as an example, but I tell people all the time, I compartmentalize. So, when there is a crisis on campus, or there's something that we have to do to help a student, I immediately go into Dr. Younger mode. I am focused. I'm trying to figure out who's the resources, who can help this people, who can intervene. And it's almost like methodical. It's like, we got to get help. We got to get help. We got to do this, and I kind of go in this operations mode of trying to solve the problem. But it is challenging because some of these things are very serious and have a severe impact on our students. And so I have to tell people when I go home, I am Toyia. I do have a heart. And, there have been times where a situation has happened and I've gone home and cried and was like, oh my gosh, this poor student, I can't believe they were going through all this. How can we do better? How can I support them? And so in the moment, I've learned how to compartmentalize and say, I've got to do what I can to help these students, to protect them, to support them. But there are times where it's challenging and you hear some of these stories and students will come in and they'll say, oh, I just want to talk to you. And I'm like, oh, okay. And, I'm thinking that they're having difficulty with a professor or something. And next thing I know, they share their whole life and they're sitting in front of me crying. And I'm like, okay, how did we get here?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, the administrator in me wants to fix it and wants to solve problems and wants to make sure that they're supported. But at times it is emotionally, it could be emotionally taxing, and I go home because I care so much. I'll never forget. I can't remember what the situation was, and they weren't saying it in a negative way. They're like, "Oh my, you just care too much about these kids," and I was like, "What do you mean by that?"
It's a good problem to have,
right? And I was like, "You're right, I do care.
Yeah.
Like if I didn't care, I wouldn't be out here doing the things that I'm trying to do, and so that's not a bad thing, And yes, it consumes my life. I have no life outside of work, which is probably not a good thing. Do not try this at home, people.
Yeah.
But I put everything that I have into the work that I do and into supporting students. And so it can be taxing, it can be emotionally draining, it can be physically draining. There are times where I go home and if I don't have anything to do that weekend, first of all, I am screaming to the top of my lungs because I'm so excited. And I stay in, DoorDash, Netflix, don't leave the house until Monday morning because I need that time to kind of reset and regroup. And so it could be a roller coaster. Yeah. There's been some really, really great highs, but there's also been some lows. And it's like, how do I support students in both situations?
Do you have any suggestions for students to make interacting with faculty more possible, more positive? Do you have any suggestions for students to kind of alleviate some of those difficulties with being in the position you are in or with other people? Do you have any suggestions for students?
That's one of the things that my staff is working on. We recognize that students are going through a variety of issues all the time. And sometimes it's not always easy to go up and tell your professor, my dog died at home and I am devastated. And so, that's why I turned my paper in. And I mean, stuff like that sounds kind of cliche, but, it's not always easy if you don't have that relationship and feel comfortable. And so, one of the things that we always tell people are if you're having some issues or something, we have our Office of Student Assistance. And most people don't even know this office exists. And that's what these people do all day, every day, is try to support students. Students can come to them and say, hey, I didn't tell anybody, but I've got 2 major, final exams coming up. And my grandfather just died. Student assistants will say, hey, let's sit down, let's talk about this, let's make sure that you have what you need, but let's also reach out to your faculty members because they need to know that you're going through this and you're not just blowing off their tests. Mm-hmm. And so one resource that we always send people to is our Office of Student Assistance. But in terms of relationships, we recognize that. We are student-facing, hands-on, so a lot of people in the sorority and fraternity engagement office, people feel comfortable talking to them, or, some of the other offices where they have a lot of programmatic things, people feel comfortable engaging with them, but they might not have that same level of comfortability with a faculty member. And so our wellness office has been doing some training with faculty and academic advisors to just kind of help them start the conversation with students. If you notice that a student seems to be off, and some faculty members are like, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, I'm not supposed to be doing it. But how you can just kind of ask the right questions to check in on your students more. And so we're trying to do things on both ends, by sending students resources about where they can go when they have help, but also working to help train faculty and staff about what are the questions you really should be asking students instead of, why didn't you miss those 2 finals? Was there something going on? You've gotten great grades all semester and something kind of tanked. Are you okay? Those conversations I think are much more productive than I'm just giving you an F because, whatever. And they have no idea the personal struggles that you have. And so I feel like that's part of my responsibility too. It's not necessarily in my job description, to be quite honest, but I think part of my job and one of the things I really strive to do is help faculty and staff understand the important role we play in students' lives. You know, they some of them look up to us and they come to us for help. And we can't just be like, I don't have the answer to that question and just kind of move on. We have a responsibility to work with our staff and to work with our students on how you help them navigate. We're reading this book. My staff, every once in a while, I do these things and they're like, oh my gosh, she's so cheesy. I can't believe she's doing this. But we're reading this book in the Division of Student Affairs called Relationship Rich Education. And it talks about the importance of relationships between faculty and staff, between staff and staff. All of this contributes to student success. And so we're reading this book so that we can develop new ways in how we do business, so that if a student comes to my office just because they know me and they feel comfortable with me, that's great. But if I can't help them, I don't just say, okay, go downstairs to financial aid, but I can actually walk them downstairs and pass them off to somebody that I know in financial aid who will sit down and help them. And so there's these pieces that I think we have to start doing and showing a different level of care and concern for our students. And I want my staff to be leading the efforts in this work on this campus.
Oh, and I think it seems like a mixture of that and then what we were kind of talking about earlier with like your public presence. It seems like there's just a lot of voices talking at you at once, you know, and it seems like there's a lot of things that you need to know. It seems like there's a lot of pressure on you.
Yeah.
But it also seems like you kind of work best under pressure.
Which is absolutely insane.
Yeah. And so like what kind of, I like to talk about general broad philosophies of life. So like, are there any things that kind of get you through like handling pressures? Like how do you convert pressure into energy? Like what are some of those like philosophical things that you think about or motivational things that you think about that kind of get you through a day that maybe students would like to hear?
Well, you know, I often tell people my dad was a pastor, so I grew up in the church. So my faith is very strong. And I haven't shied away from that. People who know me know how important my faith is. So every day when I wake up, I pray for the university, I pray for our leadership, and I pray for our students. That's just what I do every single morning, you know. And then I'm also like, Lord, give me the strength, because I don't know what I'm about to deal with when I roll up on it. You know? And I'm serious. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen today, so you're going to have to help me learn how to navigate this, right? But, you know, I think, you know, my philosophy is really one of care and concern. I think it's so important. You know, some people, I get so frustrated when people talk about the college experience almost like from a consumer aspect. Like students are customers. They want this, you know, widget. We create widgets, we give it to them, and then they move out, they graduate, and they keep. I hate that. That drives me crazy because I don't think it shows the relationship pieces that really help develop a student's experience here. And so, you know, my focus is really one of you know, making sure that it's kind of challenge and support. There's the old theory that we study when we go into higher education and student affairs, and it talks about we have to be here for our students and challenge them and help them learn how to navigate and develop the skills that are going to be necessary. But we also have to support them a little bit. We've got to, you know, let them know that they're not out here by themselves trying to navigate this big, crazy world and figure out things. So you do want to challenge them and say, hey, you're having this issue. Have you gone and talked to your faculty member? Have you told this person about the issue? But you also want to support them if they say no and say, well, there's an office over here on campus that can help you do that. You know, and so you don't have to do that by yourself. And so it's kind of the whole theory of challenge and support. But I think that there has to be this personal relationship. I think, unfortunately, there are some people, and, you know, and this is across the country. It's not just at Iowa State, but there are people who are very transactional. You know, you come here to study, I'm going to teach you, goodbye, here's your grade. And I think that there's so much more that takes place in the college experience. And so my viewpoint or my philosophy is these students are coming to us and it's our job to support them, to help them find who they are while they're here, to help them get a quality education, to make sure that they have a great experience while they're here. And so we have to put a certain level of care and concern in the work that we do. And so that's what I try to do every day. And it's not easy. You know, there are times where students make bad decisions. And I'm like, he did what? Like, are you freaking kidding me? Who does that? And I want to scream, but I also recognize, you know what, there's some learning in this. We can sit down and talk to these students and figure out why they made that poor choice, as opposed to always just being so punitive and, he's out of here or whatever. Let's figure out what's really going on with the student. And so that's kind of my philosophy, is that we have to show a certain level of care and concern. And when you do that, that helps forge the relationship. That's why I'm so popular on campus. That's why people know and like Dr. Younger, because they know, they've seen me, how I operate with students, and they know that I genuinely care about them. And I think that that's why people are drawn to me, because, you know, the thing that I talk about this all the time with my staff about being totally transparent. But last year I was awarded the 2023 Women Impacting Iowa State on the calendar. And I was like, oh, that's cool. You know, and everybody's like, no, that's a really big deal, Toyia. Like, people have been here 20 years and you've only been here a couple of years and got nominated. You're really making an impact. And for each person, they use a word to describe them. And the word that was chosen for me was authentic. And that's truly how I try to live my life and be my authentic self. What you see is what you get. And so those students who interviewed me 3 years ago, who know me now, are like, gosh, you're the exact same person you were during that interview when we met you. You know, I don't ever want to put up a facade. I always want to be authentic and true to who I am and true to the work that I do. And so that's what guides me each day is, you know, there are going to be some things that may upset me. There are going to be lots of things that I don't agree with. And I have to be true to myself in it and stand up for those things that I think are wrong. I have to be vocal on those things that are right, that I think we must continue doing. And I've also got to stand up for students. That's my role sitting around the leadership table. Everybody at that table, our senior leadership team, care about students. But I take my role even more serious because I feel like I have to bring the students in that conversation, and not always what's best for the university, which we all, of course, want what's best for the university, but I have to bring to the table, I heard this from students, and I'm not sure if that's the right direction that we should go. And that's what I do each and every day, is try to make sure that I'm articulating the voice of the students and what will help them or what they think that they need while they're here at Iowa State.
Well, and I think that's exemplified by you being on this show. I think that's so crazy to me. Just like you were saying, how people will email you and they'll be like, I didn't expect to get a response from you. Yeah. In the same way, I emailed you and I did not expect to get a response from you. Just some guy messaging you like, hey, you want to be on a podcast? It's just so, right. It's so wild. But I think that speaks volumes to you saying you want to be like your authentic self and you want to do these things, you want to help students. I think you being on this random guy's show is like the perfect exemplify of that. I think that's really awesome. But, you know, people tend to struggle with bringing their authentic self. They worry that like, you know, maybe they're not competent in whatever way or that they're wrong or that they, you know, it'd be better if they didn't. And so what do you kind of do to balance that out when some days it might be easier to just not be your authentic self? It might be easier just not to say something or not to do something. What kind of gets you through that?
Yeah, well, you know what? I think for me, if I don't say it, it's worse than if I do, you know, because then I start regretting that I didn't speak up in that moment. And that's a horrible feeling. I never want to live with regret. I never want to say there was a situation where I was asked to do something that I know would make the students, you know, would help the students out, and I didn't say it. That would bother me more than speaking up. And so, you know, I've dealt with imposter syndrome, and sitting around the table is like, they're going to find out that I'm not really as great as everybody around here thinks I am, you know, and you struggle with, why are they going to listen to me? You know, I'm just a little random girl from Flint, Michigan. Why are they making decisions based on what I say? And so I struggled with that. But I also recognize that if I'm true to myself, and it's coming from a genuine place, my desire to help students, then that will come across and people will know that. And so I've found myself in situations where I've had to speak up, and it's been uncomfortable. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, my heart is racing. Like, okay, I'm going to say this in this meeting and I'm probably going to make a lot of people mad, but I'm still going to say it anyway. I would rather be uncomfortable in that moment than go home not saying it and then regretting it and wondering what coulda, woulda, shoulda happened, what could have benefited students, what could have helped little Johnny in this moment. if I would have only spoken up, and I didn't. And so I would rather deal with the anxiety and the stress that comes with speaking out in difficult situations versus not saying anything at all.
Yeah, well, and I think you have this level of confidence that's maybe learned or different from a lot of people too, and I think that that's just such a wonderful thing for pursuing the truth and like being authentic because you know in your earlier career when you were in your undergrad, you didn't get as good of grades as maybe you could have because you weren't nearly as motivated. But then you found that you found that master's degree, and now you're like, let's do it. And people doubted you, and you were on provision, but you were like, I'm confident that I want to do this, and you pursued it, and you excelled.
Right.
And then now you go into the student affairs, and then you're just some girl from DC who, you know what I mean? And people are like, you're really young, and they made, they teased you for having the last name Younger, but you were like, I'm confident that this is what I want to do.
Right.
And so therefore you're able to stay authentic. And so I think that does a lot for staying authentic, but then also remembering the things that you kind of just said with knowing that in the future it's probably going to hurt more if you just don't say what you need to say.
Absolutely.
And so I think that that's really valuable to remember, especially when you're in a position like this where we were talking earlier how you're kind of like a public figure, you know what I mean? And I don't think that could exist if you weren't like an authentic version of yourself all the time.
Right.
I think you'd lose a lot of value, like from the students, if like they saw you as like this super energetic person, and then they met you in person,
and I don't speak.
And you're like, shoe.
Well, and I think because that has happened, and I've seen that, and so people know. I tell folks I speak to the president just like I speak to the custodian. I know the custodian's name in beard cheer. Talk to him every single day I see him because he is just as important as the work that we're doing when we're sitting around the president's conference room table. Everybody brings value and importance to this institution, especially our students. And so I tease students because I see them and I could see them like looking at me, like almost like, is that her? Yeah. And I'm like, if you don't come over here and speak to me, and then they'll come over and they're like, oh, hey, I saw you. And I think that people are getting comfortable enough with me. So they come up to me and they're like, you don't know me, but I saw you speak at the such and such. And I thought it was really cool. And I just wanted to say hi. And I'm like, hey, how you doing? And we engage in conversation. And so I think being true to myself, people have seen that I'm just a regular schmegular girl. I'm just a regular person who's approachable, who wants to help students, who genuinely are there. And I think the word is spreading, And so I had a student who kind of reached out to me, and there's 30,000 students. I meet students every day. I'm not going to remember your name, but I remember your face. If I have met with you and had a conversation, I'll remember your face. And so a student emailed me and wanted to meet with me. And I was racking my brain because I was like, I don't know if I know her, So then I was asking some folks on my staff, is this a person who I've interacted with or did an event for or something? And they're like, well, no, I don't know her. But I was like, she reached out and she wanted to meet with me. And so she came in and she was like, I was really nervous. She said, but several of my other friends said they talked to you and that you helped them. And so that's why I decided to reach out to you. And she sat in my office for 45 minutes and shared her story. And we talked about possible solutions and what, I could do. She informed me on stuff that I didn't know was going on. And so then that allows me to go back to my staff and say, hey, what's going on? I had a student come in who experienced this. This isn't cool. We need to make sure that this doesn't happen, or we need to make sure that we have some parameters or policies in place to address it when situations like this happen. And so I learn just as much from students as I hope they're learning from me. When they come in and they share information and they talk to me about their experience, and especially if it's something that's not going well, that informs me so I can go back and work on it and make sure that another student doesn't have that same experience. And so I tend to learn more from students when they approach me. And so that's why I tell them, like, you should totally come up. If you see me, come up and talk to me. And it's weird because like I said, in DC, nobody cared who I was. Mm-hmm. Nobody even knew. And, I could do all sorts of stuff. Nobody paid attention. And now I walk in the MU and it's like, hey, Dr. Younger. And I keep walking a few more. Hey, oh my God. And I'm like, okay, hello. All right. And then in my mind, I'm like, okay, I know that person. It takes me a while because I'm like, I know you. Mm-hmm. I've seen you before. And then they tell me and I'm like, oh, oh yeah, and I think that helps too, is because I'm very intentional in developing relationships with the students. And so I love it. I love it when they come up to me, when they know who I am, when they tell me, oh, I talked to you about such and such. I just want to let you know we solved it and I'm doing great and I got an A in that class. Like, I love that. That's the motivation. That's what keeps you going, because I'm like, I'm doing something right. They're coming back and they're telling me that they're being successful. Somehow, some way, I played a role in it. And so my staff, everybody laughs at me. My favorite day of the year is not Christmas. It's graduation. I sit on that stage and cry. I mean, I see students walk by and I'm like, oh my gosh. I didn't think he was going to make it. Oh, Lord. He was such a knucklehead. He kept getting into all this trouble. Hey, he made it. Oh, he made it. And so I sit on that stage and I cry and I cheer and I clap, because I'm like, wow, it's been so great to see this evolution of the student. I remember when they came as a freshman, a little, quiet and insecure and didn't want to do things. And now they're out doing all these amazing things and they graduated. How awesome is that? So that's my motivation. That's what keeps me going. I love that. That's what I'm supposed to do. And that's what gets me out of bed, even on those bad days where I'm like, oh, Lord, this is going to be a mess. Something's going to happen when I get there. I am like, but I'm helping students, and it's cheesy. I tell people, they're like, what do you got up today? I was like, changing the world one student at a time. That's what I do,
Yeah.
But some days that's how I feel. If I can just get one, if I can have a connection or do something to help one student that day, that was a good day.
Yeah, well, I think that's a wonderful place to end the conversation on, just because I feel like that's how most people recognize you. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to wrap this episode up, to talk about any information you want to share. I kind of leave this up. Most students are like advertising a club, or they say something like, "Come to my club at this time," or whatever. But a lot of people like to end it with maybe a quote that they really like, or something that they'd like to say to the general population, to the viewers who made it this far. So is there anything you'd like to say to the people who watched this episode and got this far?
Thank you. I'm glad that you thought that I was cool enough that you could spend your time watching and listening to this podcast. No, people, it's so funny, because when I went into this field, my family had no idea what I was doing. They were like, she works on the campus. Oh, she must be a professor. No, she doesn't teach. Well, what does she do? Like nobody knew what I did. And I'll never forget when when my first job at a small community college in DC, their slogan at that time was, "We are in the business of changing lives." That's what I do. That's what I try to share people. I am in the business of changing lives. And I believe that higher education changes the lives of people. It changes their trajectory. We can look at the data and show that a high school graduate doesn't make nearly as much as somebody that has a college degree and what they'll go on to make. I'm in the business of changing lives. You may not necessarily go on and get a job in your major, but you've had certain experiences that have caused you to want to explore other career paths. And I've changed your life in some way, shape, or form. And so that's what I tell people, is that I'm in the business of changing lives. And that can mean different things for different people, and it's okay. But if you come here and you leave out being a different person, being smarter, wiser, more confident, all these types of things, that changes your life. That changes what's going to happen to you in the future. And so, I love the work that I do here each and every day. Every day is not perfect. I'll be the first to own that. But I love the work that I do here. I love our students. I love the staff, because I know that they're passionate. Our faculty really want to help them learn. And that's the thing that got me to move from DC all the way to Ames, Iowa. It had to be something magical almost
to get you to
going
Iowa.
on to get me to Iowa, but I've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen it in the students and the way that they've responded. I've seen as I watch them grow and develop over the years that they're here. I've seen it in the passion of our faculty and staff who want to do more to support our students. And so that's how I know I'm in the right place. And so, I tell people all the time that they can reach out to me. And like I said, it was so funny. The person who reached out to me to ask to help them with assignment in class, they emailed me at like 12:30 in the morning like on a Saturday night, whatever. And I was watching Netflix. I was like binging on something or whatever. And I had my phone and I responded back and was like, all right, cool, hit me up on Monday. And they're like, why are you responding? I was like, why are you emailing me? Like, you emailed me. What are you talking about? Why am I responding? But I do want students to know that I'm accessible, that they have access to me and that they can come and talk to me about a variety of issues. And if I may not have the answer in that moment, I'm going to try my best to solve that. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve in this capacity. If you've seen me and heard me speak, I introduce myself and I say I have the privilege of being the Senior Vice President for Student Affairs here at Iowa State University because I consider it an honor and a privilege to do the work that I do each and every day. So thank you for having me on this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was awesome having you on. Thank you.